the class 2 or 4 years ago, who I met in Lisbon. We talked a lot about these things, and he said, "Why didn't you tell us that in the class? Why didn't you?" So I felt, well, maybe we should, but you guys will tell me if it's. Now, it will sound like I'm preaching, okay? So I will start by saying something I write on every review I do, that I sign all my reviews, and I put this disclaimer. I'm often wrong. If you think I'm off the mark, contact me. I'll be more than happy to change what I wrote, okay? So that applies here as well. It's by no means truth in any absolute sense. But these are things, this is the truth as I experience it, and you might experience something completely different. So, and all the peanut gallery, feel free to interject anytime with examples, comments, negation, whatever. So I went back 2 days ago and I went on the web, and there is a book that's called Marketing for Scientists, How to Shine in Tough Times. I did not read it. It might be good, it might not be good, but it's there. So I don't need to write one. That's at least they say no. I mean, unless it's missing a lot. So, I mean, again, my father was a marketing professor, so these are things I think about. So the whole issue of brand, what made Coke so special? What is that there's something, why do you choose a certain brand of shoes? Is that there's something associated with brand that it's its reputation, whatever we associate with it. And the same goes with names of scientists. When you think about somebody you've never met, you think, but whose papers you've read, you develop a certain view of that brand. And then when you talk to people about that person, suddenly you hear other things about that brand. It might be good, it might not be so good, but these are all part of that person, that impression you have of that person. And similarly, people have impressions about you. And so we'll get a little bit into that, about conduct. How do you behave as part of our group or a group of scientists, about sharing, about hard work, and about what I think you should do or not. So you are your brand, your good name. The name of a person is your biggest asset. And it's really hard to recover from doing for having a bad image by a certain amount of public. It's really, really hard. So always think about keeping your name as clean as possible. It appears on your work. So once you submit a paper and it goes through peer review and get accepted, your name is there forever. So may think that whatever you're signed on portrays who you are, that it's stuff that you're proud of, that it's not a paper that you would rather not have your name on. And so don't co-author papers you're not proud of, just to have another paper in your CV. It's not, in the long term, it's going to shoot you. It's not going to help you. And similarly on things you don't understand. If somebody puts your name and you don't understand the paper, let's say most of it. Of course, you'll be sometime doing just one piece in a large paper. You cannot understand everything that's in it, but make sure that you know what it's about and you're comfortable with the conclusion of that paper. We're all sometimes wrong, and we all have typos in our paper, more or less, but those also reflect on you. The more typos, the more erratas, the more issues there are with your paper, the more the people that read it would assume that you're sloppy. And if they think that you're sloppy in writing, they'll think that you're sloppy in your analytical work. They cannot separate the two. Oh, he's great in the lab, he just can't write. Well, we tend to associate sloppiness with the person. And so take the time, reread the manuscript, reread the galleys, find every typo you can, because that's going to be there again with your name on it.
I would also say, where you employ your colleagues, where you employ your colleagues
Yes.
to help you read your paper. And it's a wonderful thing to have a colleague who is not in your field, but who is in a closely related field, because they will identify jargon like that, and being able to kind of make it more accessible makes you a better scientist by making your work more accessible to a broader audience. And so, sharing those responsibilities amongst your friends is really
And don't let financial incentives get the best of you. You know, sometimes people will want you to support something and they will give you money to do it, and some scientists are happy to take the money and sign their name, even though they do not agree necessarily with the thing. Iron fertilization was a case in point. Some of my colleagues were willing to sign up with companies that wanted to dump iron into the ocean. And I think it tarnished their reputation. I think. For So, again, think about these things. Unless you really believe, you think this is the solution for global warming, we should do it, then that's fine. I mean, but if you're doing it because there's money involved, everybody knows it, and it's going to tarnish you. Yes, sure.
I was just going to ask for an example, but
yeah.
Cool.
And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of geoengineering. There's a lot of money involved in geoengineering, and they want scientists to be their fig leaves. I mean, unless you really believe, again, unless this is, and so you, unfortunately, money makes people behave in different ways than they would otherwise, and that's, you know, they have kids going to college. People find many reasons potentially to bend a bit their views because money is involved. So, it just, again, this is part of your brand. It's part of who people consider you are. And if they consider that you're doing things because money is involved and not in a pursuit of the truth, only then it will tarnish your image.
So if you happen to get a job in an environmental consulting firm, for example, it's always a good idea to know who's paying for the contracted work, just so you can evaluate that, whether that's going to make a difference in your work or the data that you're allowed to collect or the interpretations you're allowed to come to make sure that you stay true to your unbiased scientific roots.
And I mean, these issues are much more acute in the biomedical field, where there's drugs involved, there's patents involved, there's a lot more at stake than in our field.
Well, but environmental impact statements
Yeah.
are huge.
Yeah.
You know, they want to build a dam or take a dam out or, you know, flood a wetland. So, you know, clear on
So this is, again, I'm back up to the soapbox, Elena. And so less marketing, but it's affecting how you're perceived by everybody. So it's okay to be happy that somebody else is successful. It's not costing you anything. Some people feel it's a zero-sum game. If somebody goes up, I automatically go down. I don't think it's the case. There's room for everybody. It's not a zero-sum game. The more of us are successful, the more our field will grow, and we're going to get more funding, and everybody will be happier. So there's room for all. Somebody else's success is not at your own expense. It's a really sad view of the world to think that way. Because then what ends up happening is everybody's shooting down everybody the moment he's up. Not a good place to be. Be kind, share, and help. It will come back with you with dividends. If you're nice to other people, they'll be nice to you. If you help somebody with their paper, they'll be more than happy to read yours before it goes to publications. Yes, go on.
Sorry.
No, please.
Be happy for others' success and be kind and share and help. I think there's another aspect of this that is really critical, and that is watching out for your colleagues. Because there will be times when you have tough times. There will be times when maybe you wrote 12 proposals and none of them got funded, for example. 12. 12. the long run. I mean, it really is just be kind and be thoughtful and be generous. And there's so much room for this. And it makes so much better science and so much better collegiality and just a nicer environment and community of work. So.
I mean, another example is sometimes we're on panels, particularly with NASA, where there's many different fields represented on the same panel. The groups that are less critical get more proposal funded than the groups that are more critical. When you compete with atmospheric sciences or with terrestrial, in the same proposal, large proposal, if you're shooting down, people in your field because, they didn't dot the I, while these other fields do not, then you're putting your whole field in a disadvantage. I'm not saying you should let stuff that is not good go through, but just make sure that the criteria are consistent across the different fields, so you don't punish your own field more than it needs to be just because they did not. There's certain analyses that they were wrong about.
Make a suggestion.
Exactly.
Help them. This would be great if give them that opportunity.
But the word is that we tend to be more critical.
I know. So the word from Paula is that our field, we tend to be more critical than others, and that it costs us in the long run.
Like a zillion of these, like NSF and NASA proposal review panels, and the atmospheric people, so there'll be maybe like 15 atmospheric proposals and 12 terrestrial and 20 that want to look at Mars and 10 that want to look at the ocean. And I swear to God, the atmospheric people will rate like 13 out of their 15 proposals as excellent, must be funded, oh, this is great, blah, blah, blah. And then you get to the oceanography ones, and they'll rate like 1 out of 12 as excellent, should be funded. And I actually, on the last panel I was on, we kind of, at the end, we went back, and I actually forced a revote on one of the oceanography proposals that I had given something like a very good, because I had just gone through listening to 50 proposals in other fields that were mediocre being rated as excellent. And I had rated one as very good because it wasn't perfect. And so I went back and I forced a revote on that, which got a lot of protest, but I did it, and the guy got funded. And what I think he was the only oceanographer funded out of this big ball, whereas there would be like 6 atmospheric and 5 Mars, 7 terrestrial, whatever, and then 1 oceanography guy. And it's because the oceanographers just rip each other all to pieces. And the other fields realize no matter how crappy the thing is, you say it ought to be funded, and then there'll be half of them will be funded. And Paula Von Tempey's always saying that oceanographers screw themselves on these review panels. And I've seen it happen, many times. So yeah.
And the problem is, if you don't say you're very good, she can't fund you no matter what. Then if everything is ranked and there's enough money and you're at the very good, if you don't have the very good, you are below the bar. And so then she has extra money because no one got to the very good stage. So, there's always this discussion in panels, like, really, are you really going to give this good? And what does good mean? Good means not funded, no matter what.
Yes.
What do you think it is about the culture of the field or
I don't know, but we're trying to change it.
Well, I think it kind of gets back to grade inflation, right? An average is a C. That's not bad. C's not bad, it's average. That means you met your, expectation. But how many of you would like to get a C in a class? Feels like death, right? It shouldn't feel like death. It should feel like average. And I think good is average. Right? And so we sort of grade things without grade inflation.
Jeanette.
I will have the question is still why oceanographers and not other areas? Do you feel that oceanography is a less established science? There's less standards and it's harder for people to agree on what is the right way to do things, and therefore we're more critical to each other, where atmospheric sciences have very clear what is good and what is not, and everybody knows what is good, and therefore they all go for that. It is weird that it's oceanographers.
I mean, it could be that it's so interdisciplinary.
Well, exactly. In oceanography, you have very different cultures. I mean, I can tell you that the geologists, they take care of each other very well. They get disproportionate amount of funding from NSF to any other subdiscipline in oceanography. Disproportionate compared to the number of people that are in that field. So it's just people close rank when people feel that it's subfields just naturally protect themselves, and some of them are better in doing it than others.
Are we a bigger field than that others?
Yeah, I mean, maybe we don't. No, astronomers are also very good in getting funds. I mean, think about them. They work on something that does not benefit humanity in any time in the near future, except for making dreams to people. I'm serious. I mean, they totally inspire the population and inspire. But it does not. I mean, it doesn't help directly a neighbor. But they're really good in getting lots of funding.
What they do, they're good at getting a community together on, like, okay, we want the hub. Okay, we want the hub. So we're willing to let all these small grant people not getting because our field, we've gotten together to do the hub. That has happened. There's grants, they could never support. Oceanography has a lot of software people versus these other lots of fields. And these software people are out there wanting to get money to support themselves. Astronomy are almost all faculty members of universities. They're getting mostly little-fee grants, maybe pay for a graduate student or something like that. But they're not trying to play their salary off of it. And the big parts of the money are going to Hubble or the big instruments. Oceanography is soft money a lot.
And it's expensive to do. It's expensive to do, particularly to go to sea and do measurement at sea. So maybe that's, I mean, each culture has its own.
Like,
Yes?
you can change the culture, right? And I think that's the point, that Emmanuel probably is hoping to get from this, is you could change that culture.
Stacy?
Progress.
At what point, are you sacrificing funding good projects, or, I guess it's like an ethical line.
Totally.
Like, am I gonna help my community, but maybe fund some projects that I think could be better?
But you can help them be better.
Because all the other communities are funding crap projects.
But you can help them be better when you write your review. You can say, very good. This would be so much better if the authors thought about doing this and running this experiment and running this test. And then the program manager has something to say, and they can say, well, yes, you're funded contingent upon doing X, Y, and Z. And so now you have critically evaluated the work. You've provided important, criticism, constructive, and you've also given the program manager the means to demand that be done. And then people can say, I don't want to do that, and they say, thank you very much, right?
And it's not crap science. I mean, obviously that's where the ethical limit is. I did a career proposal of a young scientist recently, and he got it. And it was obvious that his knowledge of optics was very limited. But these are, people that do PhD can learn how to do things. It's not like, he was very good in the stuff he did. It just, the way he wrote the optics section was not very good. So I literally suggested things to do, so that tests to do that he did not consider, ways to all kind of things that will make his proposal successful, but without rating it low because he did not know about that test or about doing X or. So,
But there are proposals that are.
yeah,
You don't.
I agree. And then those should not, those ethically, and we'll talk about it tomorrow, those you should not support something that you're not comfortable with, ever. And that's part of being, go with your own ideals. You should not, and we'll get there also, but yeah. So, yeah, don't expect anything from anybody. I mean, and what I'm trying to say here, nobody's going to say thank you. Nobody's going to say, or some do, but often not. Do these things because you want to do them. There's no, you're not going to get recognition. Maybe you will, who knows? But if this is the motivation you have, is because you expect something in return, you're going to get disappointed. So it's much easier to have low expectation and be surprised to the better than come up with high expectation and then be depressed that you did not, whatever, got recognized in ways you thought you should be because you're such a.
A lot of this is, and I've talked to many yesterday, it's sort of like, so I'm Catholic, so it's like being Catholic. You like to aspire this, you fail a lot of times, you try to aspire to a lot of what he's saying. This one is sort of like the idea of sitting not at the head of the table, because then if you get asked to the head of the table, great. You're not disappointed.
And being asked to move from the head of the table is really tough.
And another thing is, if you have any choice in the topics you choose that you're working on, it's often nice to work on things that touch a lot of people, because you tend to then, for me, just was recently I started working on the oyster industry here, and it's amazing the positive response I'm getting. I never worked on anything that had to do with applicable science before, and it's a great joy to see the response, to see how many people get excited about it. So doesn't mean you should. I mean, if you love doing equations, do them. But the more people you touch, the more you'll feel that what you're doing is relevant to others. And for many of us, it matters. For many, it doesn't. Great, but for many, it does.
We know that is the right interest of others in applied science. A lot of people, I like applied science. I like to find what I know in all the fields I can figure out. And that's really fun. I think that's part of the oyster thing. The thing to be afraid of here is don't go and follow
No. Fashions.
the fashion.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, if you want to follow the fashion, what you're going to find is you're just going to end up competing with a whole bunch of people with the same little amount of money, and it's not really solid state condensed matter physicists you watch, or especially some of the guys in the department I watch. Something that gets hot for a little bit, high TC semiconductors. So they all go there, and then something else gets hot. They all go there. It's like, why? Do what you want to do. Don't just follow the crowd. So.
But this, I mean, you can think of Moby. I'm sure that Ken is very happy to see every ocean color satellite use it as a reference. I mean, it's nice to have something that everybody uses. There's a lot of. We're a small community. Everything you say or do is getting noticed. Just so you know. So this is part of the brand. It is, for good and for bad. It doesn't mean you have to pretend, and don't pretend, fake or lie, because it's really hard to remember what you said that was not true to somebody that maybe you did, but did you say to also the other person? It's don't even get there. But just know that people notice you. So be yourself, and don't say anything to anyone you're not willing to say to that third person in their face, because it's going to come back. People talk.
And as all politicians are learning slowly, anything that is an email is public. You might not have intended it that way, but somewhere you'll get hacked, and your opinion of, whoever will be public.
Or reply all.
Brought down many a politician, yeah.
So when I came to the U.S., which is very different than Israel in this respect, what you learn is that if you don't have something good to say, don't say it. In Israel, we used to say bad things, but we say them in people's faces. We have no problem saying them, and that's okay, because that's the way when you're used to it and it's the culture you come from, this is how you get to the bottom of things really fast. Instead of going around, well, I'm not sure I like your figure. You say immediately, this is bullshit. And But when you're used to it, it's tremendously useful because you get feedback fast. Don't take it personally because you're used not to, and you say, "Oh yeah, you're right. This really doesn't make sense," and or whatever. Or you fight your point. You say, "No, I think you're wrong because of X." But as long as you don't take it personally, you take it as a discussion on the matter. It's very useful.
And on the flip side, don't mean it personally.
Yes. Yeah. Don't assume somebody is stupid because they did something you consider as being stupid. Try and separate the two things. And learn to say no. I mean, we have a tendency to say yes, but when you cannot do something and you cannot honestly feel you can do something well, just say no instead of maybe or after or yes, and then 2 weeks later you have to send a thing saying, no, I'm not going to make it to the deadline. My mother had this saying about you can't dance in all the weddings. So I paraphrase that: it's better to dance well in a few weddings than limp in many. And we don't live by this. We try. Again, this is going back to the Catholic thing. We try. It's really hard to say no. But the earlier you learn it, and then give people the benefit of the doubt. Don't assume that whatever you observe is because they are spiteful, they try to hurt you, or whatever. If you can, ask them, why have you done that? So that you don't immediately hold grudge against people that have no idea you have a grudge against them for something they've done that was not intended at all to be what you think it was. So, this is also for just to communicate. And paraphrase on this is, if a colleague does something you don't agree with, consider that they are coming from a different place than you, including a different culture. And in different cultures, as I told you now about Israel, we do things differently. Try to figure out before judging. I thought when I arrived to Seattle, I thought that when I tell people what I think, I'm doing them a favor. And I learned very fast that they take it very differently. They think I'm critical, that I don't like them, and I was considered the rudest student they've ever seen the first 6 months I was at UW. Just because I behaved like an Israeli. It's not like I behaved like and people were dressed like me, so I assumed, we have the same codes, and we don't. There's cultures and cultures from countries, and there's called scientific cultures. And as you already notice, the same words in different scientific culture are used differently. So you see closure in physical oceanography, it has something to do with turbulence, while we use it completely differently. And then if you sit in a talk and somebody talks about closure about something, you see, God, they don't even use the terms right. And if you, as Kurt will tell you, if you go to atmospheric science, all the optics uses the same words for different things. Recently I had a paper reviewed, and the editor rejected it before even sending it to reviewers because we used absorption with units of inverse meter. In atmospheric science, absorption is what we call absorbance, and it has no units. So she said, these guys don't have a clue what they're doing. Well, it shouldn't have gone to him, but it did. And so I had to go through that thing that, there's a cultural misunderstanding here. We just are coming from different cultures, scientific culture, and that's not the right person to judge the paper. And this is another one I just added today, so these guys didn't see it. You receive money from foundation, from the government to do work with. Use it, be frugal with it. Don't use it as if, it's my pocket change, I can buy all the, I can buy myself a new computer. Buy yourself a new computer if it saves time. Buy your students a new computer if it saves time. Don't give them the 10-year-old computer because that's what you got from your advisor. But make sure you understand why you're doing it and you can explain it. The way I think about it mentally, and I teach my students, is if you can convince your neighbor that it made sense to spend the money that way, you're in safe territory. If you can't, then, because it's this money that you're spending. It's not. And remember, we're not spending our money. We say, my student, my grant, but it's neither your students, it's a student working with you, and it's not your grant. It is a grant that you were given to spend it on a specific project that somebody reviewed, and they want you to spend it on that, not just, you're buying other things with it or things that are not necessarily needed. Share. So this is, again, going back to, this is the kind of stuff Elena does like. Have your work available to all and free of charge. Again, remember your neighbor has paid for it. He has a right to see the fruits of what he paid for. They should include only material you feel comfortable about sharing. So some of us, I mean, I share all my classes. Every class that I've ever done at UMaine is on the web. Some people don't feel comfortable, and you might not feel comfortable. You don't have to, unless you're in MIT and they force their professors to share all their class material. But it comes back to you with dividends. I mean, I think I got many opportunities because I do that, without even anticipating it when I done it. To be on panels, to be an expert, to a project in Belgium when I was still an assistant professor, simply because when they Google a topic, they find your class, they see what you're teaching, what you're doing, and oh, this is a person that could be useful for us. If you have no presence on the web, it's like you don't exist. Unfortunately, that's yeah.
That said, when you Google something and you find somebody's stuff, give them credit.
Absolutely.
Send them an email and say, I found this great stuff. Like, I write emails all the time just thanking people for posting stuff because they don't have to. But I find it incredibly useful. The whole pigment thing, I wrote to the person who wrote the paper. I was like, you should share this. They shared it. I wrote back. I told everyone my students did with their pigment data, blah, blah, blah. Like, thank you so much. That made that person feel really good and valued. And I'm like, wow, something I did mattered. So be grateful and tell people thank you. We don't say thank you enough. And,
Absolutely. So another thing about that is you write a paper, you write a code to analyze data. Share that code. Other people, I mean, the likelihood that people will cite your paper goes exponentially if they can use the code to do it. Otherwise, if they have to write themselves, it's more work, it's more this, it's more that. It's less likely. So, there's GitHub now. That's a great platform to share code. You can put it on your website, whichever. But unless, again, you want to be the only one who's able to do that analysis. But then that will limit tremendously the number of people using it.
On that, have your work available free of charge? That gets to be a problem when you publish long papers in journals that have high page charges. Like, I had a paper in applied optics and the page charges were something like $6,500, and then he wanted another $5,000 to make it, free of charge. And I just said, that's outrageous. Frankly, I'd rather have the $5,000 in my next paycheck. And so and in some journals, of course, you pay a reasonable page charge and everything's online. So it is an issue there. And like, I tried to look up a paper that was published in 1940 in the American Chemical Society, and they still wanted $39.95 for a 1940 paper. And I just said, that's outrageous. I'll just live without it. So what I normally do is, like on this one paper, I didn't pay them the $5,000 to make it freely available. But anybody that sees that paper, they send me an email and say, can you send me a PDF of the paper? Yeah, sure, here it is. So maybe that's Google plus 2 clicks. But that's what I almost always do when I see a paper in a journal and I'm not a member of whatever society it is, and I don't want to pay them the $40. Just email the author and they'll send you a PDF of the thing.
or choose to publish in journals that aren't predatory.
Yeah.
I mean, you can take a stand by saying, I'm not going to publish in Elsevier or Elsevier, however you pronounce it. I mean, they are outrageous charges, and it's ridiculous. So just say no.
Can you get in trouble, like, let's say you don't pay the fee to have it public, then you post the PDF on like ResearchGate?
I have
Do you get in
not.
trouble for that?
I have not heard of a single person getting in trouble. This is why I wrote this. If you're not deriving, you've done the work, taxpayer pay you to do this work. Let's say you're a student, you cannot pay, or you're Kurt, you're soft money, you can't pay those publication charge that you find exorbitant. And we're not talking a few $100s, we're talking $5,000. I would go and put it on ResearchGate. And if ever they come after you, take it off and never review or publish with them again. I mean, we work for free. We work for free for all these journals. We review for them. Taxpayers give us on average, I think it's about $100,000 or $150,000 of grant money for one paper published. So it's huge investment. And making that the fruits of that investment non-public, I think is criminal. So there's field, like in medical fields, where it's part of your grant. It has to be in a government repository that's called PubMed. PubMed, you have to. It doesn't matter where it got published. It has to go to PubMed. And PubMed is open.
But they have.
It's gone.
Every journal has its rules. The new NASA rule that I just got, the rule was that we have to put our papers up on PubMed. And so if you publish in something like Journal of Atmospheric Technology,
JTech.
JTech, they have a one-year moratorium if you haven't paid for the open access. So you submit it to PubMed, and they have the title of the abstract, and then after a year, they'll. But, yeah, so you don't, you need to read the rules. I don't agree that you should just ignore the rules. I think you should.
Here we go to ethics.
Ram just went down.
So on my website, I have a list of the papers, my CV of the papers, and a PDF for the ones that allow me to put it on. OSA allows you to put it on your own website. So you go to my website, you click, you get the ones they're allowed to, and then I have a secret list. And you email me, I email you. That's a personal thing. That's not a published one, and you can click on every one you want out of that. But
So I personally purchased the right. I put it in my grant. Nobody has ever asked me to take it off a grant, and I purchased the right of publication of every paper that I'm lead author on. Now, or my students. I will not pay it for somebody who put me as I collaborated with, and I'm the fourth author in. I'm not going to force them to pay those fees. I'm not going to pay it that way, but I'll still post it. So that's where we diverge.
Oh, I think you totally can do it as a young scientist because you were badly advised.
No, I mean you have. You have to realize, and again, like any ethical issue, you have to be able to justify it. So in some way, rationalize or whatever you want to call it, the model for publication, if it doesn't cost you, somebody has to pay for it. I mean, if you publish with Elsevier, many of their journals are free for the authors. They do it on purpose because then they charge others to get it. So you have to, and so if you publish with them and you don't pay the open access for everybody, then from my perspective, you're not honest because that's the deal you sign up for by having it there. In others, I mean, if you can, there's what's called the normal, price per article. It's on the order of 2,000, 2,500, which is what you may consider as what you should expect to pay per article to be open access. If you have to pay much more than that, then I find it just like any price gouging as not fair. So you can say, but then don't publish with that journal. You're absolutely right. But sometimes it's a special issue. You have to publish with that journal because that's the special issue of the grant that you got funded for you. So then, so that's where you get to gray areas where, well, a priori I would not have put it there, but I'm putting it there because it's a special issue. They're gouging in prices, so I'm not paying the open and I'm putting it on the web or whatever. I mean, again, it's between you and what you feel comfortable with. But again, it's your reputation and your brand that's affected, whatever you choose to do.
Professional sites right now have a problem because the whole open access has changed the price structure. Libraries don't have to subscribe to them, and that's you pay for almost everything. And so I know Elena or Aslo has had a big problem with how they deal with their publications. JGR switched the way, or AGU switched the way they did a lot of theirs, right?
Mhm.
They now under Wiley
Yes.
or something like that because they can no longer afford how it worked.
And
Right
yeah.
now, there's a big terminal.
If anybody here owns publisher, I'd sell it. Because these are tough times for the commercial publishers, like used to put out, printed the Light and Water book. And now, and every year I get an email from whoever owns the company. I mean, it started out being
Academic, yeah.
They've been sold 3 times now. They always want me to write a revised version of Light and Water. And I say, oh, okay, I'm going to do all the work. You're going to get all the money. No, thanks. I'm putting the revised version on the Ocean Optics web book. And they, those companies are in bad shape. They're just trying to survive, most of them, just to keep from going bankrupt. Because everything is on the web, and most of that's, like Emmanuel posts his papers, and that's all free or close to it. So those traditional publishers are all in big trouble now. And they know it, and they can't figure out how we're going to stay in business when Kurt Mobley stopped putting out a new hardcover book. He's doing it for free.
Yes, Mike.
Related to that, how do you feel about these open access, like +1 or something, like open journals? How are those viewed? Do you have to publish in these big SLOs or LNOs or anything, or can you get away with +1 since it's open?
I don't think that, at least from my perspective, all these are great journal. What's important is it's accessible. Now, if you go in journal that's more specialized, you're going to get better reviewers. You're likely to get better reviewers. But I review for +1. I review for, so it's really the most important thing is it's out there. What I like about +1 is that you're less likely to get somebody to bar you from publishing because they don't like your conclusions. They agree with your method, they don't like your conclusion. +1 in particular, what's important for them is that the methodology is sound. So different journals have different philosophies. Again, it's easily accessible. It has a great impact factor, but I don't drive where I put my paper by impact factor. For me, it's much more important the community that's likely to read it. But nowadays, it used to be we would read the back of 3 journal and know what's happening in the field. Now it's impossible. So it's Google, and Google will find it if it's in the Indian Journal of Remote Sensing or whatever.
The metrics, wherever you are, coming back from your capsule Google, where you end up, you need to find what the metric is that your chairman is doing to decide, because the metric that we have to use is impact after the journals. Do a low impact, be a great paper in a low impact journal, it's not.
And vice versa, some departments, if it's a paper in a special issue, it doesn't count. Because they have a sense that in many special issues, all the journals that started will make it, no matter what quality they are. So,
That's not true.
I totally agree. I
Having
totally
special
agree.
issues,
I totally agree.
people
But
think it's going to be a shoe-in. It's not.
I totally agree. But that's, on the other hand, Colin and I published in a journal that's now closed after 7 years because it was a special issue that we want, for Ron Zandeveld. We felt strong about putting something in, and we did. And now this journal doesn't exist anymore. The papers are used, they're cited, they're whatever, and they're online. But, it's...
Method and nationality. Jules Jassy
Yeah. And it was Elsevier, and I did it holding my nose. But, whatever. It's sometimes because you want to be part of a group, or you want to be, you do things that you might violate some of your. It's okay. For me, it's okay. I'm Catholic in this respect, or Jewish. I'm not. Anyways, so this, as much as it's annoying as it is, if you behave like this, everybody else behave like this. And so it's just the way we are, and we're. So I can tell you for myself, if it's a paper that's directly linked to what I do, I will go all the way and go to the librarian and write an email and ask for the author and reach them on ResearchGate, all of the above, because the title is something that's directly relevant to my work. But if it's peripheral, this is all I do. So just like Kurt told you, he never got this 1940 paper because he couldn't access it without paying $40. So he went for another one. It was not directly relevant. It was peripherally relevant, so he could do without it. So this is the way people work. And I'm amazed. I just looked at a colleague today. Looked for a paper by a colleague, and I had to go through my library to get the paper. It's in applied optics. I looked everywhere on the web. His PDF is not out there. 2017, nice work that Kurt cited, and so I did get the paper because I really wanted to read it. But I'm thinking of my colleague. He doesn't have a website with his PDFs on, not even his old PDF, nothing. It's not good for him. The other thing about sharing, if you share instruments, share data, share everything, many more people will do the work you don't have time for if you share with them. We tend to collect data sets that, as you saw just on this cruise, that can feed many, many people's work. You can do many different question answer with them and do with them. So we never have the time to do everything that one could do with them. So if you share the data, somebody could use it for a project you didn't even anticipate, or you don't have time to, or it makes it easier. And then they're likely to want you to be part of it, or at least acknowledge you, or it gives more impact to what you're doing if other people use your stuff. And don't think that, people will necessarily scoop you. There's this fear of being scooped. And that makes a lot of people be like this. I remember a colleague a long time ago, I went to a meeting, and we brought all of our data, I was at OSU at the time, on CDs and gave it to everybody. And one colleague went to Mary Jane and said that we're doing it because we want his data. That's why it's just, when you're in that frame of mind, you always interpret everything other people do as coming from, this, they try to steal my ideas. It's just a sad place to be. It's really a sad place to be. Try not to get there. There's plenty to do for plenty of people. We're not that important. If I was not here doing the work I do, and if the work was useful, or somebody else would do it, I promise you. The individual is, as Heidi said the other day, we're all pushing the ball forward. And if you take one person off the line, the others are going to close rank and continue pushing the ball forward. It's still going to move. We have an amazing privilege to do a job that for many of us is a lot of fun and take us to amazing places around the world. So you don't want anybody to think it was a waste to invest in you to do the work you do. No matter how fast you are, you can't accomplish much without working hard. And nobody does. So you'll have to, if you stay in this field, you'll have to work hard. If you want to work 9 to 5, never work on the weekends, you may want to consider switching, because that's not going to be the life you're likely to have. Remember to take breaks, play, clear your mind. Often the best ideas you get are when you paddle or when you do something else. Staring at a computer many hours is not working hard. It's not conducive. So take breaks, do everything that can promote the juices to go. And also be reactive. Don't wait, don't let people wait for your response. Because if people have to wait and think about yourself, then they're likely to go work with somebody who responds. Now, when you do what you love, you'll spend much time doing it, naturally. So there's no problem working a lot, because you like what you're doing. So it comes naturally. You do what you love, you learn to do it well. You do what you love, it shows. You tend to be happy, and people like to be with people that are happy. And so it feeds, it's kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. And if you do what you love for your PhD, you'll never feel, even if you don't get a faculty position, or you have to find a different job afterwards, that it was a waste. Don't think about the work you're doing as being only because it's going to lead to something else. If it is, then that's unfortunate. It's enjoy what you're doing for its own sake, so that even if you don't, even something happens and you lose your job, or you're out of the field and you move to something else, it was still worthwhile doing because you enjoy doing it. And I see this is a critical point, and I see it a lot with scientists, young scientists I met in France, who are just, I worked so hard, I did a PhD and all this, and I don't have a position, and, the world is ruined. No, I mean, you learn a lot of things, you learn a lot of skills, you had fun, then it's worthwhile in its own sake. You look backwards and you say, oh, and I know it's easy for me to say. I mean, I'm not, because I have a position, but I'm totally serious about it. I mean, whatever you do, if in the long run, there are days that are bad in the office for everybody. There's days that you'd rather not have in work. But on the whole, it should be a positive experience. If it's not, consider switching to something else. So you don't feel like, I invested so much and nothing is waiting for me at the end. Any questions? Do you think this is useful? Is it just preaching on the soapbox? I don't know.
Try to do it the way around.
Which way?
Well, you will spend a lot of time doing it. You're gonna love it. Learn to do it well. You're gonna love it.
So Julien suggests we switch all those. So tomorrow we're going to talk more about ethical issues. We talked a bit here about it, when it came to, for example, how do you decide how to publish, or if you violate the journal that you agreed to publish with, is it okay, is it not okay? Hopefully you all gave your replies to the survey to Niels. There was also, and it's on your website, a list of example, and some are real example, recent example of ethical issues that happen in science, including in marine science. I urge you to look at them. They're not long articles, but just to get you to understand what kind of issues are there that exist in our communities. And in US, how many of you have gone through ethical training in your institution? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 6 out of 20, or 21, including Niels, 6 out of 21 have gone. The others, and when I was a student, I never was exposed to this. And there's a realization that it's important to expose young scientists to it because it can save a lot of heartache to everybody, to the community, and to everybody involved about what is okay and what is absolutely unacceptable. And again, that's cultural sometimes, but there's things that the whole scientific society worldwide does not accept. And that these are things that needs to be discussed, and hopefully you'll find it useful. We'll have a survey on Friday about the whole class, and we'll ask you specifically to say if you find it useful or not, because that's going to be useful for us to say for the next class, to decide whether we keep doing it for the next class or not, including this lecture. So that feel free to be as critical as you want. We want it to be useful. We don't want to. There's no point talking about stuff that you guys feel is obvious or not useful or whatever. Anything else on this subject you're interested in that you feel I left out of?